Okay, class, I'm going to start on the reading today on the top of page 56. This is still the incident between Helen and Annie having in the dining room, or what they call the family room, at breakfast. Top of page 56. Helen pummels her. That means bangs on her. They roll under the table and the lights commence to dim out on them. Simultaneously, the light at the left has been rising slowly, so slowly that it seems at first we only imagine what is intimated in the yard, a few ghostly figures in silence, motionless, waiting. Now the distant belfry chimes commence to toll the hour, also very slowly. Almost it is 12. Interminably the sense of that of a long time passing. We can identify the figures before the 12th stroke, all facing the house in kind of a watch. Kate is standing exactly as before, but now with the baby Mildred sleeping in her arms, and placed here and there unmoving, are Aunt Ev in her hat with a hanky to her nose, and the two negro children, Percy and Martha, with necks outstretched eagerly, and Vinny with a knotted kerchief on her head and a feather duster in her hand. The chimes cease, and there is silence. For a long moment none of the group moves. Vinny, presently, "What am I going to do, Miss Kate? It's noontime. Dinner's coming. I didn't even get them breakfast dishes out of there yet." Kate says nothing, stares at the house. Martha shifts Helen's doll in her clutch and as plaintively says, "Mama." Kate, "You run along, Martha." Aunt Ev blows her nose. Aunt Ev, "I can't wait out here a minute longer, Kate. Why, this could go on all afternoon. I'll tell the captain you called." "You hear what Miss Kate says? Never you mind what's going on here." Still no one moves. "You run along, tend your own business. Finally Vinny turns on the children with the feather duster. "Shoo!" The two children divide before her. She chases them off. Aunt Ev comes to Kate on her dignity. "Say what you like, Kate, but that child is a Keller." She opens her parasol, which is an umbrella, preparatory to be leaving. "I needn't remind you that all the Kellers are cousin in General Robert E. Lee. I don't know who that girl is." She waits, but Kate, staring at the house, is without response. "The only Sullivan I've heard of from Boston, too, and I think twice before locking her up with that kind. It's that man, John L." And Aunt Ev departs with head high. Presently Vinny comes to Kate. Her arms are out for the baby. "You give me her, Miss Kate. I'll sneak her in the back to her crib." But Kate is moveless until Vinny starts to take the baby. Kate looks down at her before relinquishing her. Relinquishing means to give it to her. "The child never gives me any minute's worry. Oh yes, this one's an angel of the family, no question about that." She begins off rear with the baby, heading along the house, and Kate now turns her back on it, her hand to her eyes. At this moment there is the slamming of a door, and when Kate wheels Helen is blundering down the porch steps into the light, like a ruined bat out of hell. Vinny halts, and Kate runs in. Helen collides with her mother's knees and runs off and back to clutch them as her savior. Annie, with smoke glasses in hand, stands on the porch, also much undone, looking though she had indeed just taken Vicksburg. Kate, taking in Helen's ravaged state, becomes steady in her gaze up to Annie. "What happened?" Annie meets Kate's gaze and gives a factual report, too exhausted for anything but a flat voice. She ate from her own plate. She thinks a moment. She ate with a spoon herself. Kate frowns, uncertain with thought, a glance down at Helen, and she folded her napkin. Kate's gait now wavers, for Helen to Annie and back. Folded her napkin? The room's a wreck, but her napkin is folded. I'll be in my room, Mrs. Culler. She moves to re-enter the house, but she stops at Minnie's voice. Don't be long, Miss Annie. Dinner be ready right away. Minnie carries Mildred around the back of the house. Annie stands unmoving, takes a deep breath, stares over her shoulder at Kate and Helen, then inclines her head graciously and goes with slight stagger into the house. The lights in her room above steal up in readiness for her. Kate remains alone with Helen in the yard, standing protectively over her in a kind of wonder. She folded her napkin. She contemplates the wild head in her thighs and moves her fingertips over it with such tenderness and something like a fear of its strangeness that her own eyes closed. She whispers, bending to it, "My Helen folded her napkin." And still erect, with her head in surrender, Kate, for the first time that we see, loses her protracted war with grief, but she will not let a sound escape her. Only the grimace of tears come, and sobs that shake her in a grip of silence. But Helen feels them, and her hand comes up in its own wondering to interrogate her mother's face, until Kate buries her lips in the child's palm. Upstairs, Annie enters her room, closes the door, and stands back against it, the lights growing on her with their special color, commence to fade on Kate and Helen. Then Annie goes wearily to her suitcase and lifts it toward the bed, but knocks an object to the floor, and she turns back to regard it. A new voice, in a cultured murmur, hesitant with the effort of remembering text. This soul. Annie puts the suitcase down and kneels to the object. It is a battered Perkins report, and she stands with it in her hand, letting memory try to speak. This blind, deaf, mute woman. Annie sits on her bed, opens the book, and finding the passage, brings it up an inch from her eyes to read, her face and lips following the overhead words, the voice quite factual now. Can nothing be done to disinter this human soul? This whole neighborhood would rush to save a woman if she were buried alive by caving in of a pit, and labor with zeal until she was dug out. Now, if there was one who had such a patience as zeal, he might awaken her consciousness of her immortal. Annie, you there? Hush! Annie, what's that noise? Annie tries not to answer. Her own voice is drawn out of her unwillingly. Just a cot, Jimmy. Were they pushing it? To the dead house. Annie, does it hurt to be dead? Annie escapes by opening her eyes. Her hand works relentlessly over her cheek. She retreats into the book again, but the cracked old crones interrupt, whispering. Annie slowly lowers the book. There are schools. There are schools outside. Schools where they teach blind ones, worse than you, to read and write. There are schools outside where there is schools. Annie sits with her eyes shining, her hand almost uncrossed over the book. Then, you ain't going to school, are you, Annie? When I grow up. You ain't either, Annie. You're going to stay here and take care of me. I'm going to school when I grow up. You said we'd be together forever and ever and ever. I'm going to school when I grow up. You said we'd be together forever and ever. I'm going to school when I grow up. Little girl, I must tell you, your brother will be going on a journey soon. Annie sits rigid in silence. Then the boy's voice pierces it, a shriek of terror. Annie! It goes into Annie like a sword. She doubles onto it. The book falls to the floor. It takes her a rapt moment to find herself in what she was engaged in here. When she sees the suitcase, she remembers and lifts it once again toward the bed. But the voices are with her as she halts with suitcase in her hand. Goodbye, Annie. Write me when you learn how. Don't tell anyone you come from here. Don't tell anyone. Yeah, don't tell anyone you came from. Yeah, don't tell anyone. Don't tell any. The echoing voices fade. After a moment, Annie lays the suitcase on the bed, and the last voice comes faintly from far away. Annie, it hurts to be dead. Forever. Annie falls to her knees by the bed, stifling her mouth in it. When at last she rolls blindly away from it, her palm comes down on the open report. She opens her eyes, regards it dully, and then, still on her knees, takes it in the point. Might awaken her to a consciousness of her immortal nature. The chance is small indeed, but with a smaller chance they would have dug desperately for her in the pit, and in the life of the soul of less importance than that of the body. Annie gets to her feet. She drops the book on the bed and pauses over her suitcase. After a moment, she unclasps it and opens it. Standing before it, she comes to her decision. She at once turns to the bureau and, taking things out of its drawers, commences to throw them in the open suitcase. In darkness, down left, a hand strikes a match, and lights a hanging oil lamp. It is Keller's hand, and his voice accompanying is it, very angry. The lights rising here before the fade on Annie shows Keller and Kate inside, a suggestion of a garden house, with a bay window seat towards the end and a door at the back. Katie, I will not have it. Now, you did not see what that girl after supper tonight went to look for Helen in her room? No. The child practically climbed out of her window to escape from her. What kind of teacher is she? I thought I had seen her at her worst this morning, shouting at me, but I come home to find the entire house disorganized by her.